and welcome back. This is Arthur for Mr. Excalibur. Welcome back to the channel. It's good to see you guys again. This is probably one of the finest katanas that I have yet seen, at least in the price point that I am currently staying at, which is somewhere in the neighborhood of $400–600-ish and below. This is the Hanabira from Skyjiro, and I will preface this video by saying, first of all, this took a little while to get to me, and I suspect it's because of the current geopolitical issues that we are dealing with at this point. This was filmed in roughly the end of September of 2020, so it gives you an idea of what was happening around at the time. And actually, this had been ordered clear back in May of the same year. Asked for some custom work done on this one. This one has a slightly longer handle than what's usual. We're going to take a look here. One of the things that I actually want to note is that, if you guys will notice, the swords stop here, but then it has a nice lock as it goes in. This is a really nice feature. There's no sigh rattle at all. It's quite a nice blade. The Hanabira is known, and Skyjiro is known for their very fine craftsmanship, and this sword was no different. This one really was quite a nice piece. The blade is of a proprietary steel, approximately 0.85 carbon. So that would be roughly, a 1085-ish kind of carbon steel. It's a mono steel. This has not been folded, and this has been differentially hardened, and it has a very faint hamon line, faint temper line that goes pretty much straight across. But the elegance of it really is quite nice. This cut and feels like a dream. One of the interesting things about Skyjiro swords is they feel like real weapons. This does not feel like something that you are practicing with. One of the other things that's very interesting about Skyjiro is that you can actually see a distal taper down to the point here from the habaki, all the way down, which is something you don't see in a lot of production katanas. All of their fittings are unique to Skyjiro, which just makes them, just kind of a cut above, no pun intended. I will say that the sai is rather unremarkable, although, it's not the outside that really counts, it's how the sword fits, and the sword fits just amazingly well. This cut very well. But I will say this about Skyjiro swords, and that is, these are Skyjiro swords, even their cheaper models. As you guys saw earlier, I had the Ancient Iron Warrior model, and even at that price point, even some of the less expensive models, Skyjiro, in my opinion, really is for much more practiced martial artists, people who are much more practiced than I am in this activity, in this hobby, in this martial art. They tend to feel and tend to be slightly more fragile swords, and that's kind of my opinion of them. Even after the cutting practice that you'll see me do at the end here, one of the things that I noticed was that this seppa underneath, you have these two seppas, one underneath the habaki, one on top of the fushi underneath the tsuba, is now just a little loose. Now, there isn't anything else that's loose on this sword. It has a little bit of a clink when you knock on it. And that's just testament to the fact that these really are intended on being weapons and not something to necessarily be cutting heavy water bottles with. They really are designed to do what a katana is designed to do, and that is slice through this, not plastic bottles. They are quite impressive. At this price point, if you are someone who's interested in an art piece or something that is really going to, cap a modest collection, I would say Skyjiro really is a good choice. On the other hand, if you're someone who is beginning and someone who is, learning how to practice and really in something that, might end up needing to take a bit more of a beating, Skyjiro, I would say, is not a good brand to go after. They are exquisitely beautiful swords, even at some of the lower price points. But they simply just do not have the durability to withstand poor hits or, backyard cutting, where some of the other brands, even at this price point, may be more designed to do that. Skyjiro tends to make their sword steels a little on the thinner side. So on the flip side is that these swords are probably, and as you guys will see in the footage coming up, excellent for tamashigiri and excellent for cutting stuff like bamboo or natural materials. But backyard cutting with some of the other stuff that I've done with it, I'm afraid I've probably, damaged yet another Skyjiro sword. But luckily, there's no blade damage to this one. And it remains just in wonderful shape. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this. I certainly have enjoyed it. It is a beautiful piece. It's a very, very well made sword. It's got just a wonderful feel to it. I do recommend it based on what I'd said earlier. So enjoy the footage that is coming up. We have the unboxing. We have some footage here from a couple of the people who have used the sword, including Katana Fanboy. He was a big advocate for Skyjiro, especially this model. And then, of course, my own cutting with it. Of course, that's more bottle shigiri, more of the backyard cutting stuff, and then some data, some stats about it, and that'll be it for this one. So I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's been informative for you, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye for now. So we're looking at how the Skyjiro Hanabira katana came to me, and this is how it basically came. There's no more packaging than what you see right here, which essentially is a form-fitted styrofoam container. No outside packaging. They even had to, as you guys saw at the end there, they kind of had to tack on the end of on the outside of the box a taped on sword bag, and inside it's covered in cellophane, or covered in a plastic wrap. The sword comes inside the saya. And something else that's kind of interesting with Skyjiro is that even when you get that off of it, the sword has essentially been shrink wrapped, and you guys can see it here. You can see the actual shrink wrapping on the sword itself. It's like I said, they do it a little different way, and I'm not really sure what the purpose would be to do that outside of the fact that the only other packaging that came on the sword was the outside styrofoam container. So no extra boxing on the outside, no extra packaging. This is how it came. Now, one interesting note about this is that this is kind of a custom order. When I took out the blade, it had yet another additional plastic wrap over the blade holding in some oil, and obviously that's to keep the oil. Sorry about the herky-jerky camera motion here. Just getting some nice close-ups of how the sword came. And there's the kind of the plastic wrap over the blade, keeping the oil in and keeping it from, I guess, seeping into the saya. Gonna get some up close looks at it.
Initially, right out of the box, the sword was just incredible as far as the fit and the finish, all of the fittings. This is a close-up look of the Kashira. All the fittings were nice and tight. The Ito wrap was very nice and tight. The fittings, of course, are all, I wouldn't say custom, but they are unique to Skyjiro. So whoever they've got, stamping out those pieces, which by the way are made of bronze, which it's an interesting thing. The material that's listed on the if you look at the website under this particular model, the habaki, and the tsuba are listed as being made of white bronze, which is also yet another kind of thing that's, at least so far in my experience, been rather unique as far as fittings that go with these katanas. Now, this sword came to me for about $600. This is about the price range of the Hanabira. There are some choices that you can make when you buy this. You can choose the various lengths of blade and handle, color of the wrapping, so on and so forth. You guys are going to see some footage here later of one by Katana Fanboy. His was brown. But overall, it came just very nicely right out of the box. The saya is really interesting. As I mentioned before, it has a nice smooth transition, which means it's very well done. In addition, it actually has a lot. I don't know how this is done, but as it slides in, it actually locks in place. Some really good impressions right out of the box. We're going to be looking here at some cutting done and some demos done by some other people. Now, this was a professional that Skyjiro brought in. This is actually from Skyjiro's website, although it's also on YouTube as well, just kind of showing what this particular model can do. And this particular martial artist is showing what it can do through, some young bamboo. You can see it's green, so that's some interesting demo work, and then showing what its effect on the blade, which is negligible. Katana Fanboy actually did a pretty extensive review of this sword, and actually a while ago when I had mentioned to him, he and I had actually exchanged on some comments that I was interested in this, and this actually came highly recommended. Now, this was the model that he got. I'm not sure as to what the dimensions of his example was, but his camera work, just showing just how fine the blade is very, very representative of what I got as well. The polish on these swords for the price range, in comparison to others at that price range, really is the best I've seen so far. So, I mean, you can judge from my other videos. Now, what he's done is there's a slight patina on some of the fittings. Katana Fanboy here has actually removed that, so you have this really bright silvery finish on some of the other on the fittings. And he's also done some work on the fittings to make them really stand out even more. But this really is indicative of, the kind of, quality that you're going to get from these guys. Now, the interesting thing about these tatami mats that he's cutting, that he mentioned in his video, is that, yes, they're wet, but they're also near frozen. I guess he's located, at least at this point, in some areas that are pretty cold. And so these tatami mats that he's cutting are actually pretty cold, and he describes them as near frozen. So giving you an idea of, I guess, what an example of just what this blade can take. Now, again, as we mentioned earlier in the intro, this is made of a proprietary steel, meaning that this is not necessarily stock, 10 series like 1075 or 1060 or 1095. They describe this as proprietary material, which tends to mean that either they've smelted it themselves, maybe they've got a contract with somebody who's exclusive with them to produce this steel for these swords. Not really sure. But in his footage here, he does a pretty good job of showing some various things here. Here's some newspaper wrapped around a dowel, and it takes a bad swing at it there. No offense, Katana fanboy, but let's face it, that was a... But his point was not necessarily to do a good swing, but just show what it was able to cut through. And there you go. There's the dowel core and wrapped newspaper. So this came really highly recommended from Katana fanboy as being a very nice cutting sword that has some very nice aesthetics. In comparison to my last experience with a Skyjiro sword, this one was, I would say, very comparable. Skyjiro definitely has a fit and finish and feel to their swords that is that's been unique for me so far. And you can judge my definition of unique based on my previous videos. I've been taking a look at quite a few of these things lately, and what's really nice is that part right there. It doesn't jam in, but it almost as if it's got a fitting inside where it goes in so far, and then you have to push it in just a little bit more, and that locks it into place. There's no side rattle. This thing really handles like a weapon, and I've heard that term used by some of the people who are reviewers. Not completely sure if you can really quantify what that means, but it feels as though it is something that is really meant to, for lack of a better word, kill. But I considered this sword kind of my my midterm exam as to how I've done with cutting, and well, I think I've done okay. But man, this sword just felt very nice. Its point of balance is very different than probably what is listed, mainly because I had a 30-inch blade matched with a 12-inch tsuka. 12-inch handle that I had put with this, and so as a result, this is a larger sword. I'm about 6'4", and so I like some of the larger dimensions on these katanas. I find the standard length katana just to be a little bit too short for me, and almost feels like I'm handling a short sword in my hand. So anyway, I had no doubt what this thing would do with these particular water bottles, and as I've done in the last few videos, I've matched the bottles based upon what my experience has been, their thickness, and that thing cut so clean that what you see there in the top is actually the top just kind of flopped over and in the right kind of, it flipped right over into the base. So that's how clean of a cut this was. This was so effortless to cut through these. I mean, even though, yes, they are milk bottles, and there was another good, static cut where I got a nice ring right off the top, and man, this thing was cutting like a dream. I can only imagine, based upon what I've seen in some other footage that we actually have looked at just a little bit previously, that this thing would definitely make a very good tatami mat cutter. Now, even though it wasn't a static cut, it went right through it. And cut the top off just right on through. And with that extra length, it gives you a nice distance. And there you go. Cut the top off of it, and it's still standing. Not enough weight to really hold it down. And these bottles have, slightly thicker necks and thicker plastic to them. And whing, off with its head. And whing, there can be only one. I appreciate those of you who get the reference. So, both of those, they're just standing there. And these are not really heavy bottles, which means to get that right, this sword was really sharp. Now, here's an example of, it doesn't matter how sharp it is. If your edge alignment sucks, it doesn't matter how sharp the blade is or how good the blade is. Bad stuff is going to happen. And here is a boing, real good example. I hit that thing so badly, I had to double make sure that I didn't bend the blade. So yeah, bad edge alignment. Still practicing, still getting used to it. I'm about 6 months out, so we're seeing here. For 6 months of constant practice versus what I studied years and years and years and years ago. But we give it another shot here, and there we go. Slice the top and part of it right off. I had to make sure that I didn't ding the blade. My history with Skyjiro is kind of sordid, so I wanted to make sure I wasn't damaging this thing. I was getting kind of paranoid that I hurt the blade somewhat. Now, as it turns out, the blade actually went unblemished throughout this whole process. However, it did start to loosen up some of its parts. As I mentioned before, when I was done and I was getting ready to do the wrap-up review, which you guys by this time have already seen, I noticed that the seppa, just below the tsupa, was loose. Now, I don't know, maybe it came to me that way. It didn't seem that any of the other fittings came loose during that very limited amount of cutting. I want to say that maybe it was something I just missed, but I don't think so. So, that's something to consider when possibly looking at these. And of course, make sure they're oiled and cleaned off, because quite honestly, this is still a high carbon steel blade. We don't want them to rust. We want them around to play with another day.